On January 15, 1919, a wave over 15 feet tall tore through the streets of Boston at an estimated 35 miles an hour, faster than most people could run. It wasn't water, it was 2.3 million gallons of molasses, and it killed 21 people in a matter of minutes. In Boston's North End, a dense, largely immigrant neighborhood of Italian and Irish families, a company called Purity Distilling Company operated a massive steel storage tank near the harbor. It was 50 feet tall and 90 feet across, built in 1915 to hold molasses, not primarily for food, but as a key ingredient in industrial alcohol production, which by the World War I era meant something more valuable, the raw material for munitions. The tank had a reputation almost from the start. Neighborhood residents were used to hearing it groan and creak. Molasses regularly seeped from its seams, enough that local children reportedly collected it in buckets. Rather than address the leaks structurally, the company simply painted the tank brown to make the seeping molasses less visible. At least one employee associated with the tank had raised concerns that it wasn't structurally sound. Those concerns didn't result in a rebuild or a serious structural review, only some recorking of the leaks. Here's where the engineering actually failed. The tank's steel walls were significantly thinner than they should have been for a structure of that size holding that much liquid. Later analysis found the plates were roughly half the thickness a design of that scale would have required by reasonable engineering standards, even accounting for what was understood about materials at the time. The rivets holding the steel plates together were also a weak point. Investigators who studied the wreckage afterward found the vertical seams failed first, rivets shearing off, tearing the plates apart along the joints, exactly where a structure like this is most vulnerable under pressure. Then there was the immediate trigger. 2 days before the collapse, a fresh shipment of warm molasses had been added to the tank on top of the older, colder molasses already inside. Different temperatures mixing inside a sealed tank can allow fermentation gases to build up, adding internal pressure on top of the weight of 2.3 million gallons of liquid the walls were already struggling to contain. By January 15th, the combination of undersized steel, a history of unaddressed structural weakness, and this fresh load was more than the tank could bear. At around 12:30 in the afternoon, the tank ruptured with what witnesses described as an explosive force. The failure wasn't a slow leak, it was total and nearly instantaneous. 2.3 million gallons of molasses, weighing an estimated 26 million pounds, surged out into Commercial Street. Because the fluid had just been warmed by the new shipment, it was initially far less viscous than cold molasses, meaning it moved less like thick syrup and more like an actual flood wave. Modern research, including a 2016 study using scale models, estimates the wave reached speeds around 35 miles an hour as it tore through the neighborhood. It was powerful enough to knock buildings off their foundations and sweep a section of elevated train track from its supports. The wave picked up horses, wagons, and people caught in the street. 21 people died. Around 150 more were injured. It took months for cleanup crews to clear the syrup from the streets, the harbor, and nearby buildings, reportedly around 87,000 hours of labor. For decades afterward, residents said you could still smell molasses in the neighborhood on warm summer days. The engineering explanation is fairly direct. An undersized structure, already known to be leaking, was pushed past its limit by a new load and internal pressure it was never built to handle safely. But the more important story is what happened in the 6 years of litigation afterward. Multiple explanations were floated at the time. Some officials initially blamed an internal explosion or even an anarchist bomb, reflecting the political anxieties of the era rather than the physical evidence. It took a formal investigation, including material testing led by MIT's Civil Engineering Department, to establish that this was a structural failure, not sabotage. The company had built a tank without proper engineering oversight, never tested it at full capacity before filling it, and ignored warning signs for years. In 1925, after thousands of witness testimonies, a court found the tank's owner responsible for negligent construction, awarding damages to victims and their families. The Great Molasses Flood became one of the most direct catalysts for modern engineering oversight in the United States. In its wake, states began requiring that industrial construction plans be reviewed and stamped by a licensed engineer or architect before construction, a safeguard that's now considered basic practice but simply didn't exist as a legal requirement before this disaster forced the issue. Today, the site where the tank once stood is part of Langone Park in Boston's North End. In 2019, on the 100th anniversary of the disaster, a memorial ceremony read the names of the 21 people who died there. It's easy to remember this story as a strange piece of trivia. A flood of molasses is not a phrase most people expect to hear in a serious context. But like the other failures in this series, it came down to a structure that was never built to the standard it needed, and warning signs that were managed instead of addressed.